So good evening and welcome everybody to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council workshop session for Thursday, June 11th. Call this meeting to order, wrap up the knuckles on the table, bake wood, all that. Do I hear a motion for adoption of the agenda?
Second.
Moves in second. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns, or irritants? Just say aye. Hearing none, it's adopted by unanimous consent. We're going to start out with our newest employee, I think. I don't know, I'm Marita Davidson. So nice to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
You have the floor. Please, it's a friendly group here. And despite the dungeon video and the costumes wearing, not me.
It's great to join you, and thanks for having me. It's really nice to see some faces to the names I've been reading about and hearing about. Yeah, I'm just excited to be able to talk to you today. And for those of you who don't know, my name is Marita Davison. I'm just short of a month into the climate coordinator, so still feeling really fresh. But you know, a little bit of background on me just quickly. I come from more of an academic and nonprofit background, and then the last 16 years of my professional life has been spent in entrepreneurship in the science and sustainability space. So I'm new to local government. So it has been and will continue to be a bit of a learning, but I'll get there as I get my footing. But you know, obviously one of my main responsibilities is to implement the climate action plan. But I also think I need to be keeping an eye on opportunities that align with the city's stated goals and operational needs. And so that's the purpose of me talking to you tonight, is to present one of those potential opportunities. It's the Washington Zero-Emission Incentive Program. It's called WAZIP for short. And again, I just wanted to informally introduce this to you. I want to emphasize that it's just an informational overview at this point. So in discussions with Public Works and other folks, I've become aware of some potential bottlenecks and challenges that lie ahead. And so in light of that, you know, we're not asking for any kind of action or anything like that at this point. It really is just informational. All right, but to provide a bit of context to ground us in the discussion, as I'm sure know, the Climate Action Plan was adopted in 2024 after a significant city and community effort. And as part of that process, the city's greenhouse gas emissions were analyzed, and the transportation sector was the single largest contributor to our greenhouse gases, almost 70%. And not surprisingly, on-road vehicles is a big portion of that as well, about 31%. And so as a result, the Climate Action Plan identified fleet electrification and the accompanying infrastructure readiness as a high priority in the Climate Action Plan. And then the climate element that was added in 2025 further reinforces that direction, right? By establishing a policy framework for supporting action towards electrification and zero emissions vehicles. And so those adopted priorities are what led me to this program. And to consider it as a possible future tool that we have. And so what is it? We'll go to the next slide there. It's a fairly new state program. It's funded through the Climate Commitment Act, and it's administered through the Department of Transportation. And it's really designed to help public agencies and other fleet operators. It's to help them evaluate and then hopefully procure medium and heavy duty vehicles. So we're not talking about SUVs or pickup trucks. We're talking about things like maintenance trucks and dump trucks, things that are in the, you know, really within the public works fleet. And it's designed to help usher that process when it makes operational sense. So it provides various levels of support, you know, whether it's financial incentives through vehicle discounts that are given at the point of sale, so through the dealers themselves, and they're fairly deep discounts. And public agencies are also eligible for an additional, what they call an enhanced discount, it's a 15% additional discount. They also provide technical assistance So planning support, infrastructure support, in terms of assessing readiness and feasibility for charging infrastructure. And at least at its inception, the statewide funding was $112 million. That's since gone down because there's actually been quite a lot of interest in the program. And that is also one reason why I thought it was worth bringing to the floor now, because it's unclear how long those funds will be available. But I should say I do think that for the city, the technical assistance and the planning aspects of this might be just as valuable as the financial incentives. So that might be something that we could really take advantage of, especially given some of the uncertainties within the facilities here having to do with charging infrastructure and the specs required for that. But just really briefly, what I see as the potential benefits, I've already talked about this a little bit, the technical assistance, the assessment for infrastructure. They also help in selecting vehicles. They have an extensive catalog that they help walk you through and map on to your needs. Obviously the access to some pretty deep state incentives, and then there's potential grant stacking opportunities, meaning that we can layer on multiple forms of funding, whether it's state or federal grants, and other incentives through the utilities. Those can all be layered on top of WAZIP. So it doesn't preclude you from using the WAZIP opportunity. But again, I've been made aware of a number of limitations and potential bottlenecks having to do with the readiness of the facilities that will need a little bit more evaluation, and also the fleet suitability and transition schedules, right? It doesn't make sense to replace a fully operational vehicle. It doesn't make any sense to do that. So it will have to be really closely tracked to when those vehicles need replacing and if those are available at the time that happens. So yeah. And as I said, just in conversations with Public Works, they're advising that right now the participation would just require some additional planning and prep, which makes a lot of sense. But with that in mind, looking ahead, what might this look like as we further evaluate and explore the opportunity? I would anticipate that the next year would be in the monitoring and evaluation phase. So we'd be tracking the funding availability, tracking the program to see how it's doing, coordinating with Public Works, and just continuing to assess the facility and infrastructure readiness. I do think that's something that might be worth thinking about more in the immediate future. And then further along, as the fleet replacement opportunities arise, we can then start assessing suitability, availability, and potential costs, because there will be upfront costs for the city. It's not a grant program, it's an incentive program, it's a discount, right? And then if it does appear practical to and cost effective to pursue this, we would return to you, to council, with some more specific recommendations and implementation options. So, and just again, to emphasize that right now we're not seeking any kind of action on your part, but just want to make you aware of it. And yeah, so that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions to the best of my ability. I'm still learning about the program. But yeah, open to any thoughts or questions you have.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation. Yes, please.
Just a question I think I know the answer to, but police vehicles would not be considered part of the medium or heavy duty.
They are not.
Okay,
That's correct. Yeah.
Mayor for Tony.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And, I love the fact that you jumped in with both feet. That was one of our major recommendations, of course. And one of the things that I'm wondering about is our former Public Works Director, Rebecca Dickinson, had started to talk about studying the needs for City Hall in terms of putting EV charging infrastructure here. Will this be built? Well, not that we're going anywhere with this yet, but basically, did you build on that work, or will it be a fresh start on it?
Well, and I've spoken to Rebecca about it. I think her plans are ongoing to continue that assessment. We could build off of that, certainly. There are very modest funds available for the infrastructure planning side of this. I think they will provide time, but as far as funding, I think it's quite modest. There are other state programs that we could tap into for that as well. But in discussion with Rebecca, she felt pretty strongly that, we don't have the capacity right now, and we need to further investigate, further research what the capacity needs would be and the cost, right? But I will say, I had a really great conversation with Ross Freeman from King County this morning, and he's been participating in the program. He was continuing to apply for it, and he said, you know, he said, well, with Lake Forest Park having the small geographic footprint that it has, if there are 240-volt, plugs that you can take advantage of, a lot of these vehicles, you know, they don't require a ton of charging to get you where you need to go. So that could be a way to pilot something in the near term, if possible, if those infrastructure constraints are too surmountable.
Nice, thank you.
Colleagues, other questions? I'm sorry, Vice Chair Golden.
Hi, welcome, and it's also good to put a name to a face, and welcome to the city.
Yes, thank you.
I won't always dress like this.
You guys.
Dawn.
You guys.
Oh,
We all.
Question.
He's dressing down today.
My real question is that since would be more heavy vehicles,
Mhm.
is it likely that if we were to pursue this, we would look at doing vehicle charging at our public works facility rather than city hall?
Yeah, I think that is probably the most likely outcome, for sure.
Yeah, so in that sense, it wouldn't be tied to generator upgrades at city hall, and so that could possibly proceed at a different speed than city hall upgrades and city hall personally, the public vehicle chargers.
Correct. Yeah, though I don't know I don't know if Rebecca or others have assessed the readiness of those other facilities. I'm not aware.
Administrator Bill.
I believe the study will look at public works as well. So we understand what we have out there, because we have to look at the transformer, the kind of loads we have on it right now. It's just enough.
From what I figured, transformer currently would not be capable of handling the loads.
Yes.
Follow up.
Actually, hold on, let me make sure I go. Paula, did you have any other things?
Welcome,
Thank you.
Yeah.
and I liked your
Good.
presentation, that's a very interesting that you've been able to tap into a program that would be able to help us already.
Thank you.
Checking with our friends online, we have Mr. Muhlenberg, are you with? So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand, happy to. Yeah, Councilmember Rosen.
I just want to also extend my welcome and say that I'm very sorry that I'm not here on Regalia Day in person. But it's concert nights and someone has to be home with a baby, so.
And you're dressed up like Councilmember Woolman, right? Of
course.
Okay, you have your clothes up.
At home, yes,
Yes, indeed.
exactly. But no, this is very exciting and I hope it can all work out and bring some of that climate commitment cash back here for EV charging. Let's do it.
You bet. Thanks, Councilmember. Colleagues, any other, and I'm sorry, back to you. Second round.
Yes, second round. For the public works, do you think any of their assistance would help design electric battery backup type system? That would then be a backup for these vehicles, because one of the concerns is if we have a power outage and those are the vehicles that need to go out and clear the roads and take care of, storm debris. We want to make sure they can stay charged.
Right.
Do you think that would be
Yeah.
included as a technical assistance?
In speaking with Rebecca, I know that's something that she's looking at and concerned with. I'm not sure if the backup would be involved in the technical assistance piece of that, but I can find out.
Sizing it is, I think, pretty important.
Yeah, I
to our
think you're
goal.
right. But again, I think given the small geographical footprint, hopefully the reliance on those backups is going to be minimal.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I would actually, Councilmember Rosen.
Yeah, sorry, that reminded me of something I was going to ask, which is whether solar can be part of that also, that it can be a sort of solar battery charging infrastructure to then ensure the resilience of it and maybe feed back into the grid and be a little bit more resilient that way as well.
Yeah, I think solar is an exciting direction, but from my understanding from Rebecca, it sounds like at least here at City Hall, the roof is not able to sustain the solar panels. That's what I've heard. But yeah, I'm not well versed in that, so I can't.
But I mean,
speak.
would this be able to support something like that, or is that beyond the scope of these grants?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would think that it's beyond the scope. There was
Okay.
no mention of solar anywhere in the programmatic information that I saw.
Makes sense. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues, other thoughts, questions, concerns? Illuminations, nothing. I would just offer too, it reminds me actually that as we go through all these projects that we have for massive CIP projects, that we want to make sure that the utilities that are involved in these projects are future proofing what needs to happen. Question of transformers, the question of underground wires, the question of various things. It's something that, you know, government in general doesn't do a very good job of coordinating on, and it's really imperative that we maximize, you know, when sound transit comes through, when Bergman gets redeveloped, because it's been done twice, when, you know, of these various things, that they don't shortchange the needs. Now, having said that, of course, that can be expensive, but putting conduit in is not, and making sure that there are opportunities for expansion makes sense. And right now, and you're probably seeing this, we're constrained by a lack of forethought relative to expansion capabilities around our community, particularly at City Hall.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Anyone? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hopefully that was not too painful. You did very well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Moving on to the draft letter to King County Metro about proposed changes to bus route 372. I believe this is Vice Chair Goldman's.
Yeah, I can present this. We presented our initial draft of the letter at our council meeting a couple weeks ago. Based on your feedback, a subcommittee with council members Good and Rosenow and I went over the letter. We strengthened some of the language, added a bit more detail. And so now our city clerk emailed the most recent letter a couple of days ago. It's in the council packet. And so at this point, I'm happy to take any feedback. The most, I would say 80–90% of the letter is the same. We just strengthen some of the language. So opening it up to feedback about the revised letter.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goldman. Colleagues, questions? Feedback, concerns?
I'm really glad to see this letter because I know that it's becoming a real issue for our residents, and I'm real happy with this letter.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues, other questions? Here,
And I wanted to thank the subcommittee because I think the strengthening letter words, so taking out the days and putting in more definitive terms, I think is very effective. So let's get some traction.
great. Administrator Hill.
I did reach out to other city managers around our north end area. We heard back from one and they asked, they have their own relationship that they're nurturing, so they didn't sign this letter. The others did not respond. So.
Are you able to say which city, or would you rather not say?
Maybe you can find a colleague at the other two or three that might be willing to.
And for what it's worth, on an individual basis, I have touched base with a council member, Ken Moore, who's interested in the letter. And whether they would sign on. This is an official council, LFP council letter. And then I don't know how easy it would be to have an official council letter with sign-ons from individuals.
I had one thought, because we're asking for something, and I'm just thinking, would it be appropriate to ask for something? So we're leaving it with, there's no ask to it. So I'm wondering if we were to say, can we make an appointment to talk, or can we expect a response by a certain time? I think that maybe setting an expectation for a conversation about it would be helpful.
Action.
An action item.
Sure, sure.
What do you think?
Colleagues, thoughts? Councilmember Muhlenberg, you popped up onto our screen, so did you have a thought or question or?
Yeah, I had a question. I was going to wait for Paula's to get finished before I raise my hand, but as I read this letter, it's not clear to me. Are we asking for restoration of this 372 service that exists today that connects our communities to the university district, or are we asking for a stub bus that connects Lake City to Kenmore?
So I think we're trying to give Metro options, and so both. So one option, and I'm looking on page 2 about our proposals. One option would be keeping the 372 as is to the university district. Another option, if they still want to send the bus to a train station, choosing Pinehurst rather. Though I guess that actually, as I'm thinking out loud, currently I think Metro, their favorite part of the 372 is the university part. And so sending it to Pinehurst actually doesn't really solve that problem, because then it would be even further from us.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I think our core ask is to maintain the 372 as a bus that connects the university district and North Shore community. But if we want, I think, it would be reasonable. In fact, in an earlier version of their shoreline of the Linwood Link connections, there was a stub that basically went from the Lake City Fred Meyer up to, I think, either Kenmore or Bothell Park and Ride. So asking, that would also address some of these concerns about, at the very least, it would get you from North Shore into Lake City. So it would get you part of the way there and make it easier to transfer to buses further south. So I think we could reframe it in that sense. I think it was Councilmember Rosno had he was the one who proposed Pinehurst, and so maybe he has something to add to that.
Councilmember Rosno.
Yeah, that was, I put that line in, and maybe it isn't clear as it's written, that the concept there would be something running from the north to Pinehurst. And so you'd have then those 20 blocks on Lake City Way of overlap between something running north and the proposed 72 or whatever, such that you would have overlapping. The goal in my head is, at least if it doesn't run all the way from UW Bothell to UW Seattle, that there are stops in between where someone can get off the bus, wait at a stop, hopefully under shelter in inclement weather, not have to cross the street, not have to push a stroller, a wheelchair, a grocery cart, all of those sorts of things across a busy road, as the current scenario is. But just to be able to get off and transfer if it's necessary to have that transfer, that you don't have to then transfer and walk along the way. So that was the concept there. And if it's not written in ways that makes that clear, then it needs to be adjusted.
Councilmember Muhlenberg.
I just want to express for the minutes that what I hear our community expressing is disappointment that their connectivity to the university district is going away specifically. If we're going to take this approach and write a letter to Sound Transit or King County Metro, I think we should honor what that request is, which I've heard presented to me in two ways: either make it quick for me to get connected to the 185th Street station, or continue to provide me service that goes through the university loop and connects in the U district. It's the diversion to the 148th Street station that I think is the frustration point for people, because it effectively doubles the length of their commute. So we're in this strange part of the geography where, because of our location, the rerouting of the bus actually punishes us instead of supports us using transit.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. Yeah, Councilmember Riddle.
Maybe not in this letter, but something that you may want to think about is putting some numbers to it. How many schools are on the current route that would be served, and, finding key, data points, specific data points that we can point to, that even if we were to do the link and all the way down to UW, there's this desert in between that is just not being served And so, I mean, I would be happy to try to pull up some data points, but if you guys think of other important things that we could pull up that will no longer be served, that'd be great.
Thank you, Eric, for
So yeah, thanks for the thoughts, and that piece of information that our city administrator gave us that nobody else is going to be signing on necessarily, except with the possibility of a friend. Gives us a little bit more freedom to be more strong. So if you, I think we should say what Councilmember Milleberg said, which is literally, we want a bus to the university district. Not only that, I think we can also tie it into the climate goals, because if you travel double the number of miles, it's not strict one for one doubling of your carbon footprint, but it's not that far off either. So I'm thinking that basically we can use that argument.
please.
If we bring in climate into it, I think where there's a climate penalty is if some, people are going to choose to just drive to 148 station and catch the
Yeah,
train
exactly.
rather than take a
Or what
bus
is
that
that?
kind of goes out of the way, or they'll drive to some other park and ride.
Or to the university itself.
And I would add just a church privilege here as a UW brat, growing up there as a kiddo. I rode the bus all the time from about 7 years old on. And when I was a student at UW, I rode the bus down there, the same thing. And that route is one of the reasons I believe, honestly, why historically, I'm pretty sure that Lake Forest Park has had a bigger demographic of UW professors and employees than any other community in this area. And it makes a whole lot of sense. It was organic, it grew through various things. My father, late professor there for 38 years. It was from the 50s on, there was bus routes, and this is really concerning. And I again, as we've talked about before, Lake Forest Park and Councilor Muhlenberg said this, we're almost, I'm paraphrasing here, Matt, but we're kind of a pass-through city. And so why do we get penalized for always doing the right thing and having people that ride the bus and do so Councilmember Muhlenberg, I'll leave it there.
Council member Goldman's comments tripped off another thought in my mind, which is when you look at the transit stations that are around us, the parking lots are all full by 7 a.m. So full that Sound Transit has recently changed policy now to issue parking permits that are available to a limited number of individual single vehicle drivers, and then more available to carpools. They're charging a fee for those permits. They sold out in the first day. So there's clearly demand to be able to get to these facilities and use these facilities, and connectivity that brought our community in Briar and Montlake Terrace into the Montlake Terrace station or the Shoreline station north would benefit a lot of riders, I think, up in this end of Seattle. And as I think Councilmember Furutani observed, people are getting back in their car and driving to the university. And that is the trade-off that people are facing. If I can get there in car in 20 minutes and my commute has now turned into 45 or 50 because of the routing of the 522, transit has failed for this area.
Yeah, it's they're going to the mob lot. Please.
So I see another thought, putting on my sales hat. Is it appropriate for us to look at directing this at a certain person that has control or oversight over something like this, and set up a meeting and then present the letter, so that it's not just a letter that's coming in and we read it, put it down, but actually face to face? I'd be willing to go along and do such a meeting, but they can't as easily just put it down and put it away. If you're talking to someone directly, it's a lot harder. So it may be a delegation of people, set up a meeting, send this letter ahead of time. I want to meet with you on this certain time and let's talk about this. Nothing to lose.
Colleagues, thoughts on this? I think getting into the right hands is essential. And we do have quite a few friends at Metro. But at the same time, some of the decisions are not made. Many decisions are not made. So we have to figure out our audiences, and I think that
Can we find out who might have oversight over something like this and target that person? I mean, if there's friends at Metro, maybe possibly could find a name.
if already come with extra involvement on this one.
So there's a staff member that she's the sort of the government liaison officer at Metro, so it's her task to basically work with cities. I think she would be the first contact. I could reach out to her and say, hey, because I know, she was important in setting up a meeting with Councilmember Rosenow and I regarding a community shuttle to the park. So she would know the people to say if we wanted a meeting to present this letter and talk about the 372 service. So I think I could reach out and say that we will likely have a letter, and it sounds like we're not going to be approving this today, but let's aim for the June 25th council meeting. I could reach out and say, we're going to approve a letter regarding the 372. Could you set up a meeting for up to 3 council members and the appropriate person at Metro?
I think that's appropriate.
Alex, any other questions, thoughts on the point?
So if I could just confirming next steps, it sounds like there's a few things people want to add, maybe stronger language about the action item, setting up a meeting, more direct language about a university district connection, maybe emphasizing the climate impacts that if this restructure is getting people out of their cars, things like that. Do we want the same subcommittee, so Councilmembers Good and Rosenow and I, to kind of take this and create a new version? And then we could bring it to either the COW on Monday, the 22nd, or the council meeting on the 25th. Either way, the goal, I think, would be to approve it on the 25th. Right.
We could pass some ideas back and forth.
Does that sound like
Thanks all the specific decisions here, but head nods. Yeah, yes. As long as, I think the affirmative, be right, not the confused. So, okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the discussion. Very important work. Moving on, planning commission work plan here. I think this is also.
I think I might defer to Councilmember Riddle. There's there's sort of a couple of slides.
Sure.
To be clear, to put those up.
Please.
Sarah, are you okay?
Yep, totally. Yep, I was nodding, but very shallowly, just waiting for it to come up.
Director Hopkins with us, so.
Thank you, Director. So, 3 of us were kind of exploring what's next when it comes to the work the planning commission may be doing and responding to their need to get maybe a little bit more direction and make sure that they're aligned with council, so that we're not wasting any of their effort and then coming back and having to double back and stuff. So through that, Councilmember Rosenow, Councilmember Goldman and myself worked on some brainstorming, and here's what we came up with. So, can you go back one quick step? So where the planning commission is right now, Councilmember Rosenow is the liaison, so he was able to speak to this. They are currently working in that option 1, where we had the 3 options, which is just basically removing certain barriers in the code and cleaning up the current code. Not really developing a lot of new material, but just making sure what's there is in top shape. Stop me if I've said anything wrong. Next. So next thoughts, next steps. We all seem to want to see a more robust middle housing option being presented and thought or worked on. So looking at simplifying the zoning down to the 2, which brings us in line with the comp plan. We had the conservation sort of residential middle housing side, and we had the more standard residential middle housing zoning. And what that could do is really just simplifying our 5 zones to 2. What that also helps us with is we would only need to respond to 2 different zoning options as they're developing the rest of their work. The other element is there is the Leland, the consultant report that was done, has a lot of great information in it. 3 of the sort of action items that Councilmember Rosenow told me about. So thank you so much for perusing that document thoroughly. Suggesting a lot coverage increase over the board and making it consistent. Standardizing street frontages. Right now, we have various different sizes. And possibly tackling ADU placement. Side yard, front yard, places that we currently excluded. Those were 3 ideas that they thought might help us see more investment in these sort of middle housing ADU elements. So we have a structure there that the planning commission can begin working through and debating on. So it felt like this might be a good place to go next. So they've got it cleaned up, so they kind of know what's there. And then this is taking it to the sort of next level. We also recognize they have a lot of work to do, so we wanted to give them a nice, comfortable chunk that is very well defined. Next page. If they have more time or they want to continue their focus, some other areas that they may want to look into, giving potential incentives, housing in Southern Gateway, where we already have our density zones, allowing or incentivizing specific type of middle housing or like cluster housing, cottage housing, I think is what we call it now. Courtyard, additional height. What is some incentivizing that we can do that would make those options more likely to be actually built, right? It's great testing in the code. It has to be, someone has to want to build it and be able to afford to build it. So what incentives I could do? And then collaborating with a community land trust. Let's look at like what would a greater, more sort of structured relationship with a community land trust maybe might look like. So these are some ideas after they get through kind of cleaning up the zoning and adding some more information around this middle housing using the Leland report as their structure. Any thoughts at this time?
I'd like to give Director Hoffman a chance to weigh in
Yes. You just
on
read a second.
timing and alignments, things like that.
My first, thank you for this. My first reaction is there's a variety of ways of looking at things and opinions and perceptions on the commission, but they're unified. They do want to do this work, option 1, and given that it's June and they don't have a quorum for July and our next meeting is August, that is really solidified. But they are all also committed to 2 and 3. And one additional category, which is in doing those, if something pops out of that that's advantageous, not to ignore it because it's not on this list. But this would represent the clarity that they're seeking. In doing option 1 and then making progress, their fear was, we don't do that, we're going to talk about it the same way we do every meeting and a year will go by. So this is that kind of feedback. And I believe that Councilmember Rosano will give some flavor of what happened Tuesday night. So I think it's well aligned with that.
Any thoughts from subcommittee members?
I like all the things that are on these slides. Yeah, the challenge is balancing what we would like to do in an aspirational sense with what the planning commission actually has the bandwidth to accomplish. I suppose what I want to avoid is I want to avoid a situation where they kind of keep going in circles as to what they might want to look at. And so the goal here is to catalyze this. Can we kind of say, hey, here's some things, you don't have to go around and debate this anymore. Just hit the ground running on these items. So that's my goal. If as a council, we can reach a consensus on what is doable for them, but also help them to start moving forward more rapidly.
Councilmember Roseman?
Yeah, I'll just say, and I was going to hold on to this for the committee report later, so I'll do it all now. But yeah, this was what we talked about at the last meeting, and they have a plan going forward for certainly the next few months, and so I think that what I see out of this is really what we would like them to have behind that in the queue. I'm not conceiving of this as something to reopen their debate on this, but to make sure that they have that perspective on sort of where we see the opportunities coming up and make sure that we're not leaving anything off of their radar. As you said, Director Hoffman, as other opportunities present as they work through the code and see other things and see opportunities, if they see that we're thinking on the same lines, to make that easier.
Could you go back one just to the next steps? I think one thing that the subcommittee was cognizant about is providing them structure on something that's already kind of been started. We've already got the comp plan, we've already got the legal and consultant report. We felt that would be helpful in moving them forward, gives them ground to really, get traction on. But if they have other, ideas, then, they are an independent body, but we were just hoping, like you said, that gives them a little direction, so it's not just this big wide open box.
I think it'll do it, and it also works with budget. If you look at option one, that money's already spent. Luckily, there's grants, it's in the code, and we have a couple of case studies active right now that we can conceptually apply. And try out different scenarios of, I guess, very low budget. And then as you get into design standards, block coverage, architectural, it needs to be more expertise than just we stole this number from another city. And so then in option two, you need more analysis to back up, what block coverage should be, when you're moving in a new direction. Not in the sense of option one or some of this merging of two existing zones, but when you're creating something new and looking at flag lots, easements, ADUs next to a kitchen window, we're gonna need slightly more budget, but still reasonable. And then when you got it up to option three and you're talking density bonuses, fourth story, or then set a gateway or design guidelines, then you really need a profession. So I think the progression works.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, everybody, for the hard work on this. I would offer, as one of the hats I've worn for a very long time, project management, things like timeline. Where are we? We are, as Director Hoffman said, we're in June. We want to make sure that we don't start setting a precedent to do a diversion in the middle of the year. We need to, as policymakers, ensure that we find a schedule and there's predictability for the planning commission, the staff, and when it comes to budgetary considerations. And I recognize that fully that, Director Hoffman jumped in on a moving train that was going a million miles an hour and a lot of things that need to be taken care of. The planning commission supported this community in getting those things, doing no small efforts on your part, being massive, but seriously, to get these things across the line. And so now we're at a little bit of an inflection point, and it really means, I think that there is also a discipline that needs to be addressed here. We need to make sure that they have understanding where they need to be going within the parameters going forward. So time is absolutely one of the factors. So, and Director Hoffman, can you talk a little bit about time frame and because I want to make sure you have predictability.
Yeah, we do. We don't have the mandates or the grant deadlines,
Yeah, exactly. It's nice, but the leash is off, right?
It's a better position to need to work diligently versus this is the date. We have that. In crafting the work plan, they're on track. It's 40% of the work plan, not anticipated to end on January 1st. So it's likely to be carryover and keep going. But if they do option one into the end of the year and have something to push forward, I think that would be acceptable. Something to show for it.
Thank you, Director. Vice Chair Goldman.
So I'm hoping to get a little clarity. We keep saying option one, and option one, if you were to go back one slide, is kind of. Backwards. So cleaning up the code. So can you give some examples of the type of stuff they're looking to clean up? So my hope is, again, since we're in June, that they already have some ideas for what option one entails, like what are they targeting?
The one that comes to mind is that we adopted the base guideline or minimum standard to meet GMA successfully. And we had to adopt a certain amount of housing types. One of those is cottage, but a tier 3 small city density of 2. So the obvious is, how do you implement it, cottage and so forth, as it's intended with density 2? And oddly enough, we have 2 examples. So from there, it gets squishier. I have applications. And it's evident that there's a discussion going on in the community about, let's say, different opinions. I'm calling it development review. We knew it was a learning curve. We knew that it wouldn't be one amendment to one code and, and come in and meet that sentence and you're good to go. We have building codes, we have fees, we have processes, critical areas, we have tree code. And so the feedback I'm hearing is not specific enough. Where's the ambiguity? Why don't you tell us? It's more feedback like, we wish there was more clarity because now we're implementing based on this new middle housing and it's not clear to us and it's taken a long time. And so I don't have that detail, but I think if we talk conceptually in scenarios as we planned on Tuesday night, we can begin to take the opportunity. They are laypersons. They don't do it every day. I would not expect them to read all the codes. That's my job. But if they put themselves in the position of a property owner or a prospective developer, and we come up with a scenario, and I help with what's in the code and what they don't know, they will see that it's a bunch of codes that need to be met. If out of that they determine, I don't have an example. If they determine that building fees are an impediment to middle housing, it's not likely that that's going to change. Or that building code is an impediment to cottage housing, it's not likely that's going to change. But the hope is those gaps or procedures or process will become clear. And if any word in the code is lacking, those amendments would be cleanups. So that's the goal. I just don't know they exist. But we get the pleasure of implementing it live with an active permit. We can't talk about it in the meeting, but we're going to do it exceptionally.
Thank you. Very quickly, Councilmember Rosenau.
Yeah, I'll just add that the conversation that sharing to the degree that I understood the council's consensus and was sharing it on Tuesday was, that wanting them to move forward and just expressing a general sense of our urgency to see advancement on affordability, broadly speaking, and through the work that they've begun on option 1, and then that we would continue to give them feedback and guidance and support as they needed it. So I think that's what we're talking about. I think gives them the help and there's we can continue our discussions and mesh them up with their work as it unfolds, and I think that'll work well.
Thank you, Councilmember. I would just offer to, as a layperson, having gone through the code for all these years, even before I was a council member, there is legacy. There are legacy issues within the code that we will not know are an impediment to proper things that the community is asking for until it percolates to the top. I mean, I've seen it over and over again. There's things relative to steep slopes, there are things relative to setbacks, and it's conversation, as I indicated at the council meeting last time, that at the Sound Cities Association board level, we're talking about what can we do to encourage our legislative friends in Olympia to simplify things, make it more clear, so that we don't have to go through and, piece by piece, try to sort out these situations, and recognizing fully that Lake Forest Park is a very unique environment. And I mean that with exclamation points on either side on environment. And I think it's really, important. It's again, we cannot be scattershot, so focus is important, and particularly for Director Hoffman's sanity and our planning commission's sanity. So
And I will add one thing, one bit of lack of clarity, confusion will always be there.
Yeah.
And that is in development review, the site conditions, who lives next door, how many trees, the stream that runs through it. Every project is extremely different. And so you apply the same sentence to all these scenarios, and so that will never go away.
Councilman,
So-
Vice Chair Gold.
Next steps, it's my question for Director Hoffman and Councilmember Rosenau. Has this conversation given you enough guidance to go to the planning commission and say, this is the sense of the council?
I could answer first. It 2/3 or 4/5 matches the roadmap that was outlined by the commission Tuesday night. And then through the council liaison, we can further the conversation with this information. So a little bit more specific, but it matches. But that won't be till August.
We gotta work on that. Yeah, there's some conversation there, of course. Colleagues, any other questions, comments, about this great work? Really exciting stuff. Anyone online? Okay, with that, we're adjourned for now. We're moving upstairs, and thank you, everybody.